And we're back. Hello. And I'm here this time, but we're missing someone, Peter.
Yeah. I really have to get used to this one, Nikolai. I was just getting used to the fact of you're not being here, and now I have to do it with you, but without Matthias. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how
Challenging
this is
times.
going to go. Challenge accepted, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
No, of course not. But we're back with, there has been new service release of Intune 25.02. That's just been released and has been rolled out completely. And there has also been a few sort of changes to when the docs has been updated from what we have observed over the last couple of releases, right? Where they, instead of releasing the what's new updated documentation with what is coming in the next service release, somewhat in the beginning of the update cycle. Now it feels like it's rather at the end of the cycle once they have completed like the big regions, I would say, because we have had to push forward these recordings a little bit. But you just have to adjust, I think.
Definitely, it's good that we're back on track.
Oh yeah, certainly. And like I mentioned, we are now going to talk about 25.02, and there are a few, I would say, really interesting things with this release, but it's not like our previous recordings in the beginning or mid of 2024, where there was a lot of new things coming out. It still feels like they are ramping things up again with new features, but it's kind of lightweight overall. But you know what, Peter? Let's get into it. Let's get started with Windows. What is new there? And I think honestly, let's just jump to the big thing of this whole episode, which is device query for multiple devices, right? I think that's something that has been at least hyped when, yeah, sure, I've been sick. Everybody probably knows that by now, but I still follow along on X and Blue Sky and whatever other social media there is. And a lot of people have been, at least from what I've observed, interested in this new feature. But Peter, can you give us a quick demo of what it actually is that we are talking about here?
Sure. Just for a little bit of a little bit of recall from previous times, like we're familiar now with device query for single devices, let's call it like that. So we can query a single device and we can real-time get information from that specific device. The thing that was missing until now was the fact that we couldn't query it on a lot of devices at the same time. Well, that has changed. So now we have the option here called device query. It's in the overview of the devices node, and that actually enables you to query multiple devices within your tenant. The one thing that is good to keep in mind here is that you're querying cache data. So everything that is already inventoried by using a properties catalog policy, like the ones that we're using for the device inventory, that information will be the information that you can query by using device query for multiple devices. So it's actually using the same data model and the same Intune data platform schema to enable you to query similar properties across the board. The one thing you have to keep in mind, though, is that at this point, there is like a slight difference between the properties that you can query between a single device and multiple devices, but you will quickly see that difference when you're actually browsing through the UI. Like it gives you a direct overview of the properties that you can query. And one of the main benefits, I think personally, is that we can now also actually get overviews of devices within your environment. So you can do stuff like allow it to paste, like summarizing data. Like in this case, I'm just counting information devices based on the architecture of the CPU. Well, and that gives you actually, that's always fun. if you did a copy paste, and then it gives you a syntax error.
Lovely.
Yeah, what did we do here? Let's try again. I think I did the same thing, but now it is working. Probably there was like a white space somewhere.
Exactly, at the end or something in between.
Yeah, exactly. But the cool part is that it can now summarize data. Like in this case, you can find out how many devices within your environment are running that specific architecture and the specific manufacturer and model of that CPU. And this is just one of the many examples of the data that you can pull now by using device query for multiple devices. And yeah,
and
basically,
so that I understood it correctly, because this is rather new to me as well. Is this querying only the inventory data with the inventory functionality?
Yeah,
That was released a month back.
Yeah, it is. So it relies on the same data flow like the device inventory. So it also locally relies on the inventory agent to send the information to Intune, and after that you can query that information.
So first
if
things first, you need the inventory configuration to be set to be sending the data in, or is it going out and actually querying it through that same channel?
No, you actually have to configure your device inventory first by using a properties catalog policy.
Yeah.
And once you've done that, and that is actually sending data to Intune, then that is the data that you can query by using device query for multiple devices.
Cool. So the difference really here between single and multiple is basic that single goes out to the device directly if it's online and fetches the data. The multiple device query functionality relies on the inventory data of such devices. Yeah. I think that's good to understand and know the differences there, right? So you don't expect it to go out and figure out who are all the devices that are online and get information from that. But
so that also means that you have to keep in mind that device inventory works with like a 24-hour windows that it's actually sending new data to Intune. That will also be the same delay that you will see in your data that you're querying via device query for multiple devices.
Yeah, cool. Good stuff. I think this is really, now we're getting somewhere, right? I mean, before just inventory data, it doesn't really, well, cool to have it inventory, but where can I work with it? What can I do with it? How can I interact with it, right? How can I make sense of it?
I really hope that the next step will be that we can also create custom reports based on the data that we collected.
Or being able to export it. I think that's one of the keys, right? Because it's awesome that we can start collecting data, even if we are somewhat limited in a sort of controlled space that Microsoft thinks this is what you probably want to look at. Well, it's Intune, right? We we get something, we get the sort of core functionality in the beginning, and then they just iterate from there on and build
exactly
the next version of it.
So it's like the baby steps principle. We're getting there, but it takes time.
Yeah, certainly. But the next thing in the Windows area that has been updated this release is that there's a new security baseline for Windows 24H2, which is pretty cool. So that has been, oh, excuse me. Yeah, you can see I have been sick. My voice is not fully restored yet. But yeah, so we have a new version basically of that contains a new additional security features related for 24H2 specifically. Do we have anything to show there, Peter? Is there? I mean, we could.
That is actually a good one. I think the easiest thing would be that if we just go there, because there is at least one thing I know that stands out. And besides that, I also think it's good to say that this is actually the first time that we're getting like follow-ups on the security baselines that are actually coming out on a regular base instead of like, I think the one before 23H2, we had like 2 to 3 years that we had to wait on that. So it's good that they're taking it more serious now. So that's always a really positive thing.
24H2 was released in October last year-ish.
Yeah.
Now it's February, March. I do reckon that there's obviously going to be, a delay in adding these things, but the baseline itself has been, for GPOs and stuff, has been out there for quite a while, hasn't it? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think indeed that the general information about the baseline is already available for a longer time.
Yeah.
But if we're looking specifically at Intune and the way they previously updated security baselines and everything related to that, you can now actually see that they're taking it more serious and they're actually owning the product of security baselines now within Intune, as we're getting more regular updates now with new versions, etc.
And I think the switch to having this whole sort of thing backed by the settings catalog or the device configuration v2 functionality really helps in that matter, right? It's way easier for them to just do an import, the new sort of baseline itself into Intune, and then just transfer that into, or convert that into a settings catalog profile that we can then use from a security baseline perspective.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah. And I won't go through all these settings because it's really a lot, and a lot will be similar to what it used to be before. But one of the things that you might notice directly is, for example, that we now actually have like a pseudo configuration. Like one of the things built into Windows 11 is the pseudo on Windows. Well, now by default they have a setting for that within the security baseline. So that's one of the adjustments that they've made, and that one directly stands out because it's actually on the bottom.
That's great.
And
of course, besides that, any other security baseline, you would do a comparison with the previous version to see what's new and have your configuration changes transitioned over to the new one.
Definitely. And the cool thing is actually that they're now also, well, already for a long time, they're actually documenting this kind of stuff. Did you know that?
I missed that completely. I always thought that, oh man, this is something really tedious to sit and compare.
Yeah, but the fun thing is that I just copied it from another place. They're actually documenting the MDM security baseline and actually all the other baselines also. And you can even select the different versions within the documentation that also revert back to the settings that are available within the specific baseline.
This is pretty cool.
And this also actually gives you directly, it actually shows you directly what I mentioned earlier, that this was previously one of the last ones. It took like 2 to 3 years before we got an update, and now we already have the next one. So that gives a good feeling about where we're at with
definitely. That's a good improvement if we are going from 2 years down to 6 months and maybe even faster for the next time. That's a good improvement for sure. But almost on that kind of topic, there has been some additional configuration settings added into the settings catalog, which is related to all of the 24H2 functionality around Windows AI. And I'm talking more specifically about the recall functionality. I think everyone at this point have heard, or at least somewhat read something about the recall functionality, and what it is and where it is, or at least how to figure out how to disable it. But I was under the impression that that's still in Windows Insider thing in the previews there, right? Or in the
isn't it related to those Copilot Plus machines?
Yeah, it could be.
that you need to have one of those devices, and once you've got those devices, that you can actually use those type of AI functionalities like recall, and I thought there were like a couple more similar to that.
Yeah. But I mean, of course, I think it's really great that we, I mean, for those who don't have those Copilot Plus devices in their environment, or at least have not perhaps yet upgraded to 24H2 or a version where recall is in fact available, it's great that we have the settings available as soon as possible to control this behavior prior to when we maybe wanted to look at these things, right? Instead of we have to, oh, now it's enabled. Oh, darn, how do we disable it quickly, right?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, you need to wait for us to update something. That's not really a great position that you want to be in, right? So really kudos, in my opinion, that these things are being treated with, the kind of, I don't know for a better word, but like respect for organizations that we really want to control this ourselves, and be able to roll it out in a controlled fashion where it makes sense and where it's applicable, and those kind of things.
And this is indeed one of those features that got a lot of feedback, and especially a lot of pushback on the introduction of it.
Oh yeah, certainly. Recall 24H2. I just need to double check. Is it really available in 24H2? I wasn't aware. That was not easy to query, but yeah, we can figure that out later afterwards. But let's just quickly show the settings catalog there and those new settings that has been added around recall. I think it was 5 different settings. One that basically controls the feature itself by disabling or enabling, and then we have the additional ones there.
Let's go to the right place for that. If we go to Windows, we go
or maybe
to
Linux. I don't know. No.
I wish that was an option. No, I don't. I actually don't. Sounds like the worst idea ever, actually.
Oh, yes.
So what we can do is we can add a settings like.
I think if you go down to Windows AI, it should be available in there.
Yeah, they have like a whole category for that kind of settings.
Yep.
Yeah, and here we go. And indeed, what you mentioned, it still mentions with these settings of allowing recall enablement that it's still a Windows Insider feature.
It is, right? Yeah, because I was really under the impression, maybe our viewers can correct us afterwards, but I was under the impression that that's a feature that was going to be released with 25H2 later this year, but I might be completely off.
They had a lot of pushback on it, so I don't know where we're at indeed with the introduction of it.
Either way, honestly, in my opinion on this whole feature itself, I think it's very much a consumer kind of feature that's most likely not going to be enabled in that many, enterprises or organizations or companies generically. You would probably want to disable that kind of functionality. That's my personal view, though, I should say, at least.
Yeah, I can imagine actually what you're saying, especially the way it makes snapshots of the stuff that you're doing, and yeah, without actually knowing what you're doing at the moment. So you could be working with confidential information, and then plop, you suddenly have a snapshot of that specific action.
Yeah, or at least until you can read up more about the functionality and how it's sort of handling the data and where it's being potentially sent off to, so that you can decide if that's something that's applicable for your organization or not.
Exactly.
Then it's good to just disable it and then controllably roll it out for where it makes sense.
And I think that's the key, what you mentioned there, that it's really important to make sure that you understand what it does, where it stores the information, how long it will be stored, how it is accessible, all that kind of stuff. And once you have that and note it down for yourself, you can make the right call whether or not you should use it within your environment.
Exactly.
And once you decide that you can use it, you now have all these settings available to, well, configure how much storage space it can use, how long it has to save or how long it can save the snapshots within your environment, and actually also configure some deny and or no, it's actually all deny. Yeah, it's all deny list for specific apps and UIs that should not be part of your recall snapshots. So that at least gives you some control over the data that is part of the snapshots.
So for every developer, every development tool that might contain a secret or anything like that. Or any kind of browser that may contain sensitive information or whatever it might be.
That sounds like a nice job for you, Nikolai.
Yeah, I'm a bit hesitant. I need to understand the feature a bit more before we would potentially enable it. But first of all,
Totally
we would
makes
be
sense.
Copilot plus PCs, right? So
Yeah.
we don't have at the moment, unfortunately. But cool. Let's move on a bit because we have another Windows-related update that has come out this month. And it's for something that we truly love and admire, right, Peter? Something about hybrid join and autopilot and those fancy things that everyone is screaming for. No, we should not make jokes about that. It's still, even though I know that a lot of friends within the community is not in favor of this scenario, I still understand that there are a few companies out there that have a need for doing it this way. And the improvement here is that for the Intune connector that you would run on-premise somewhere to connect to your AD, now has a low privileged account. Unfortunately, we can't really show anything about this because neither of us have this set up in any of our lab environments. But we were talking a little about this before we started the recording, and neither of us could remember what kind of account did you use before? Was it like a local administrator account or what was it? Either way, Microsoft have probably heard that there's some enhancements to be made there. So if you're a customer and using Autopilot and the hybrid join flow, definitely look into this. From what I could understand when I read through the docs, you would basically, if you have a current setup with Autopilot and hybrid, you would not really be impacted by anything. With this rollout, it would continue to work as is. But if you set up a new one, that would use the low privilege account, I believe. Let's just quickly scroll back and see.
Are you actually still using hybrid joined devices within your environment, Nikolai?
No, we're not. So basically, it says the Intune connector for Active Directory to use a low privilege account, which increases the security of your environment. The old connector will no longer be available for download, but will continue to work until deprecation in late May 2025. So I'm assuming if you are still using an older version of the connector, it would still continue as is, but as the new version comes out and is updated, you would start to use this sort of low privileged account instead. That's my interpretation of it. But then again, I'm sorry, I haven't used this or set this up in the last 5 years, so I'm not a good advocate for this. Yeah, I think
we do still see customers that are using hybrid joint devices, but often not in combination with Intune. As we still see, if they're trying to do that, we still see loads of issues, or at least the customer notices loads of issues.
I remember almost 5 years ago when we looked into the sort of modern transition or modern management journey that we embarked on, we actually looked into the hybrid scenario if it would be applicable for us, but we quickly deemed that, at least through our testing, we didn't really see a benefit of going through that route and get all those hassles with VPNs and issues and line of sight to domain controllers, because we knew that our AD was a enormous monster. So we took the decision at that point to simply just, okay, let's rebuild everything from a policy perspective, and also sort of go through everything to see what is it that we really configure and what is it that we want to configure. Not trying to advocate for making the transition. We truly understand that there are scenarios where this is fully a supported and applicable scenario, but again, if you can, move away from it. If you can as well.
In the end, it really depends on why you're still think that you need that hybrid join. And as long as you have a good, solid reason for that, which doesn't include that you need access to your file shares, because we have many different ways how we can facilitate that.
Oh, yeah.
But if you have some good use cases for still using the hybrid join, yeah, this enables you to do it, and even in combination with Autopilot.
Exactly. But let's leave that subject and transition into the endpoint security news that's related to this service release 25.02. And it's not that many, but it's a Defender thing. So unfortunately, Matthias is not here, so you have to step in, Peter, because our viewers know by now that me and Defender is not a love story.
I really thought that Matthias is not here, so that's going to be Nikolai.
Oh, you thought I would do it?
Yeah, I thought you guys were interchangeable. How do you call it? That you either have Nikolai or Matthias.
Just because we're both Danish doesn't really mean that we think the same or love the same thing.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
But so basically, from what I understand at least, is that the device control feature of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint has been enhanced from a configuration perspective, right? Previously, we had a tedious way of enabling it and controlling it through CSP and custom profiles and such. These days, it's a little bit more modern, I would say.
Yes, we actually got some nice configuration options now. So we already had the reusable settings that we can use for specific IDs of, what was it, printers and...
Like removable devices and those
exactly.
Kind of things,
right? Yeah. So we have those options, and besides that, the main configuration of device control was still done by using URIs via CSPs. And the cool thing is that has changed. There are actually two routes that you can use now. One is the endpoint security route, in which you can use attack surface reduction policies to actually enable device control. But like I showed Nikolai before we started the recording, one of the main reasons why I'm not really a fan of this configuration option yet is the number of configuration options that we actually have if it comes down to the specific settings that we can enable and configure. Because if we look here, we can enable the device control functionality, which is actually also the same that we also need for printer control, for example. And we can configure the default enforcement configuration by a default allow or a default deny configuration. But that's about it. Besides that, we can, of course, configure the reusable settings in here, but we don't really have the option, or I must be missing something, to also configure some categories of devices that we want to, enable or disable. And if we look specifically at the settings catalog, which I already had opened earlier, there we do have that specific additional setting. So when we translate it back to the profile I showed earlier, we have the device control enabled. So either enable it or disable it. and the default enforcement, like the default deny or the default allow. And besides that, we also have the secured devices configuration here, in which we can configure the categories of devices that will be part of this configuration. So we can actually differentiate between printers, CD-ROM, WPD devices, and removable media devices. So from that perspective, I think I prefer this configuration option above the one via the device control policy. Unless I must be missing something, of course, but this one seems to make more sense at this moment. And with that, we can enable device control by using a built-in configuration without relying on custom CSP configurations like we had to do before. So I would say that's a huge plus.
Yeah, I think so as well. So that's great, cool. But that's about it for the endpoint security stuff. Let's go into macOS, iOS, and Android and see what's new there. And like we started off with this recording, it's not really that much, but at least there's been some enhancements around the VPP token name for macOS and iOS devices, essentially, where you can now easily see which application in that list is associated with what VPP token. And I think we don't really have a demo of the token itself, but at least where we believe this new enhancement is. And that's if you go to the portal in the app section for iOS and iPadOS, you now have a new column name in there, which is, I would say, probably useful. It's been some time since I worked with this. Recently, I've also been appointed the architect for our mobile phones. So
oh, really?
I need to start learning this again. So maybe you will see me talk more about this in the future.
Oh, that sounds like a good thing.
Yeah, we'll see. But I think from what I at least remember and understand about all these things, it's definitely something that's useful to see in there if you have multiple tokens, right, for various purposes. And it's easy to identify. Very simple.
Yep. This makes that identification a lot easier.
Yeah, and that's something that Intune previously in various different like blades or workloads have been a little bit inconsistent of, like really not showing that this is this application type or those kind of things. So more of these things where you have this sort of possibility to differentiate between what these things actually are and how they are associated with what they are. I think that's a huge improvement overall. So even though it's a small change, it's essentially a good change.
Definitely, yeah. And it starts with the little things and enjoying them.
Oh yeah, for sure. And continuing on a little bit, we let's talk a bit about this, Peter, because the managed home screen for Android now has a public preview where you can authenticate using a QR code instead, and also PIN, I believe that you mentioned.
Yeah. And that's actually a combination between Entra functionality and Intune functionality. And that basically means as much as that within Entra you have a new authentication method available. And that authentication method basically allows you or enables you to create QR codes that your users eventually can use for signing into specific apps on shared devices.
So a really good improvement, actually. It simplifies the sort of shared device scenario a bit, from what I understand about it.
That definitely, because it enables the sign in to scan the QR code and enter a PIN. If you put my screen on, I can actually show you a snapshot from the documentation of Microsoft itself.
Oh, nice.
Like they basically enable you to, in this specific case, use Teams, scan the specific QR code, and then enter your PIN to eventually sign into the device. So that enables you to make that sign-in process also on shared devices a lot easier than they used to be. And of course, it's not the strongest authentication method that you can imagine. So you have to make sure that you eventually also make sure that your security is, well, solid enough to only allow those QR code sign-ins, for example, on those shared devices.
Yep.
So it really has a specific use case on those devices.
Oh, yeah,
and it works similar with web sign-in on those shared devices. And I think that really enables your frontline workers to switch between those devices, between users, etc. So a huge step forward, I would say.
You mentioned it there, frontline workers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you guys actually have a lot of those.
We do. We don't refer to them as frontline workers. We have another internal word for it, but I definitely understand it. We do not manage many of such devices, though. Interestingly, it's being managed by a completely different team with the whole factory itself.
Really?
So
makes sense
not for us in general IT, if you call it like that. But I wish we had more of it, because it's definitely an interesting scenario and interesting sort of ways of enabling these kind of people that are employed through simplification here, right? I mean, because now you don't need to type that much on those kind of smaller devices or iPads or tablets, we should probably say. So yeah, I think it's a cool improvement. Everything that can be simplified, I'm all for it, as usual. And talking about a little bit about simplification, maybe not super related, but something that's new as well. And the last thing for this episode is that the managed home screen can now actually allow you to select a ringtone, which I have no idea if that's useful or not. Maybe you have better experience for it. I'm not sure in what sort of scenario that's, maybe for, I don't know, in hearing aid kind of, scenarios or those kind of things. But at least
I think it's cool that it's possible. But
exactly.
That's as far as I get, actually. I never had the question like, can you enable the ringtone selector on your home screen?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, I mean, since you work way more with those kind of mobile device scenarios and setups and such, have anyone ever asked you? Apparently not, but someone must have asked Microsoft to build this. So apparently it's useful for someone out there in various scenarios. But we wanted to round it off with this, because we both felt that, well, maybe not but cool still.
I actually think it's a really cool shout out also for people that requested this functionality for the specific use case that they requested it for, because I'm actually quite curious.
Yeah, so if you are one of those who have viewed this episode, please write a comment at the bottom and explain your scenario, because we would very much love to understand where it makes sense and how to use it.
I think I haven't even changed my ringtone on my personal phone.
I was just thinking when I noticed that you took up your phone, like,
yeah, I was
I
like,
always have the ringtone or the sound just turned off, and
exactly
vibrates. So, I mean, I never hear if someone is calling. I just see that something is happening on the phone, and then I interact with it. I never have the volume on. But then again, it's also because I have small children, I don't want my phone to ring while I'm putting them to bed or something like that. Sure, I can use personal, what is it called, like profiles or something, where I can change these things, but I just turn it off. I think that's easier. I've learned to do that over the last, 8-9 years.
And if I look at how often I get called on my mobile phone, maybe that also says about how popular I am, but I hardly ever get called on my phone. It's always communication via Teams or other channels.
Likewise. Same here.
Yeah.
Same here.
A funny story, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
My youngest son, he's probably not going to like it that I'm going to say this. Until like a year or 2 years ago, he didn't even know what that phone thingy on his phone actually meant. He didn't even know that his phone was used for calling. He only knew he could call via WhatsApp or via FaceTime and that kind of stuff.
I think we're entering the new generation here, Peter, where our generation is more the old school people.
Yeah.
In a way.
He even had that phone app. He had it hidden somewhere on his phone. Like, I never used this one. Why is it on it? Why can't I deinstall it?
Oh man, that's funny. Well, I think we should round it off with that sort of bombshell kind of thing in true top tier sense. And so thank you very much for watching. We will hopefully be back in 25.03 when there's a new service release and go through those features as well. So thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for watching.
Yes, bye all.